Chapter 9. The 10th Street entrance to Tompkins Square Park was a large paved area where people were rollerblading and playing hoops. Jimmy entered farther down on East 9th by the preschool swing sets and jungle gyms. I followed at a distance, keeping his denim hat in sight. Inside the 3-block-wide park was an abundance of vibrant greens, a soothing eye relief from the prevailing gray stone and red brick of the city. To my left, a line of wooden benches occupied by couples and men alone. Near the stone drinking fountain were 2 men in wheelchairs, one watching the pigeons and squirrels forage in the grass, the other spinning in circles and popping wheelies, balancing himself between the spoked wheels, rocking the cradle. Jimmy had a hoppity gait, easy to keep track of him from a safe distance. Either he was hurrying or limping or both, maybe a bum leg. Stepping out of the shade, I felt the afternoon sun come down on me hard. A green pickup truck from the Department of Parks and Recreation was idling before a small, squat brick building housing the only public restrooms in the area. Here, the path joined other paths curving through the park. Jimmy kept going straight east. Looking around, it was hard to believe that when I'd first moved to the East Village, the park had been in severe disrepair, uncared for, and abandoned like many of the buildings around it. Buildings vacated during the 70s by landlords unable to afford their upkeep. They were later invaded by heroin and crack dealers who claimed them as strongholds and dens for addicts and prostitutes. Their presence drove out the regular folk before strings of fire, accidents, and arsons forced nearly everyone out. The neighborhood became untenable. During that time, Tompkins Square Park was taken over by the homeless. Hundreds, young and old, established a shantytown on its ground, a diverse community of anarchists. Others claimed abandoned buildings nearby as squats and vacant lots as public gardens. The city took no notice until a real estate boom in the 1980s saw developers buying up cheap properties east of A. Suddenly, it was in the city's best interest to improve the park and make the neighborhood attractive to wealthy outsiders with the means to pay exorbitant rents and higher taxes. This was called progress. In August 1988, the city tried to impose a curfew on the park to oust the homeless. Over 400 policemen arrived in full riot gear, some mounted on horseback, some in low, hovering helicopters. A bottle was thrown from the crowd, and a brutal neighborhood-wide riot erupted, lasting long into the night. Thereafter, the park was closed off by a high chain link fence. A concrete bandshell, once a public performing space and popular shelter from the elements, was demolished. Later, in redevelopment, the city gave back a park for families to picnic in on Sundays, but it never rebuilt the bandshell, nor found a place for the homeless, who scattered themselves to other smaller retreats. Ahead, on a bench, a black man in a mustard brown t-shirt, his slick, muscular arms the color of bronze, called over to Jimmy. Hey, Mr. Green Jeans." Jimmy stopped, looked, and went over grinning. They met in a complicated handshake that ended with each stamping the other's clasped hand with a fist. Jimmy looked in my direction, but not at me, leaning against the fence of the dog run, watching a stippled Great Dane prance around an Irish setter that was digging its front paws into wood chips. What with the aroma of the cedar basking in the sun, I could hardly smell the shit going down. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jimmy on the move again, walking toward the exit onto Avenue B, aka Charlie Parker Place. I thought I knew where he was going, so I hung back a little. On either side of the lane were ancient oak trees, tall and thick, stretching leafy boughs that arched high in the middle. The ground pulsated with brush strokes of sunlight filtering down through their swaying branches. Birds chirping and squirrels chattering, newspapers skidding across the pavement, kids grinding by on skateboards. Behind me, soft tires crunched pebbles and an engine hummed. I turned and saw a blue and white police cruiser creeping up. The female officer riding shotgun gave me a long, blank look as the prowl car went smoothly by and pulled out onto Avenue B going south. I couldn't see Jimmy anymore, but I wasn't worried, figuring he was headed back to the garden lot where I first saw him earlier that morning. Still, I crossed the street at a jog. On the southeast corner was the rebuilt Trinity Lower East Side Lutheran Parish. Farther down, most of the buildings were deserted. Rusted gates, locking entryways, steel shutters drawn down. Not even the graffiti was fresh here. I read as I walked: Swoop, Capo, Gypsy, Mr. Dollar Sign, LES, RIP. When a dark shape rushed at me from an alley crack between two buildings, I leaped back and collided flat against a soft, solid form behind. I tried to turn, but suddenly powerful brown arms descended on me, tight as tongs, trapping my hands by my sides. I hadn't heard him coming up behind me. He'd been careful, and I'd been careless. Hauling me off my feet, he slammed me down hard again, hard against my heels, the impact jangling my organs inside and out. My sunglasses flew off, pain resurrected throughout me, inducing a newborn anger. I arched my shoulders and wrenched backwards, smashing the top of my skull into his face. I was aiming for nose cartilage, but caught hard chin edge instead, doing myself more harm than good, resoundingly ringing my chimes. He lifted me again. This time I bent my knees to keep from snapping a bone. I flopped down onto pavement, flat on my ass. Jimmy leaned down into me, his bug-eyed orange lens sunglasses close to my face. In their dull reflections, my head looked bigger than usual. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't land me in more trouble than I was already in. Not that either Jimmy or his friend, the guy from the park bench, were taking cues from me. They grabbed me and dragged me into the narrow alleyway that reeked of urine and feces, my feet kicking glass and rusted bed frames. We came out in the back courtyard of the buildings. The two upper floors caved in, half demolished by fire. No help then from gawking onlookers. Then Jimmy's friend tossed me onto a mound of brick rubble. He held me down as Jimmy went through my pocket. He pulled out the club invite, the photo receipt, my cigarettes, and something I hadn't realized I'd brought along, the fact sheets from Matt, covered with my notations about Gloria/Glow. He read the pages over, then stuck them into a breast pocket of his denim shirt and buttoned it. Stepping in closer, he asked me, "Why are you looking for Glory?" I misunderstood, said, "What? I'm not." I nodded. A nod from Jimmy, and his friend shook me hard and fast like an industrial agitator mixing cans of oil base. "Answer him," he said, baring teeth, too metal. "Gloria stole my watch last night. They say the truth shall set you free, but it had no effect on them." Jimmy fished out my wallet, his hands trembling like he had the shakes. Maybe he did. Glad I wasn't the only one nervous. He flipped open and read my license and ID. Not impressed, he looked through the billfold, not touching my last few dollars, but pulling out the credit card receipt from the veterinary hospital. He read it. "What the?" He read it again, then took off his sunglasses and stared down at me. His right eye was green with brown flecks, but his left eye was covered over by a murky film like mother of pearl inlay. He asked me, "You paid $120 on my dog's vet bill? Pike's your dog?" He smoothed down his Fu Manchu mustache, then shot a glance to his friend and shook his head. "Ray, you can take off, man. Got this covered." Ray thought it over, deciding for himself. "Your problem's mine, man. You sure?" Jimmy nodded. Ray let go of me and said later. He left the way we came in. I reached up my hand to Jimmy and said, "My wallet?" "Some answers first. Who you working for? Who's looking for Glory?" "That's two separate questions," I said, getting to my feet. "First, I'm not working for anyone. Like I told you, she's got my watch. She took it last night after 3 guys got through stomping me. I'm just trying to get it back. As for your second question, it's a good one. I'd like the answer too. For starters, the 3 who stomped me. Maybe you know them. Skinhead types, one's named Stosh. He thinks your friend has something belongs to some guy named LSD. As I heard myself say it, I made a connection I hadn't before. LSD. LSD Entertainment Productions. Ted Wiley's employer. Damn. Don't know them, Jimmy said, but I've seen them. They were by my place yesterday, sniffing around for Glory. Just like you. The fucks. They flipped. They think they stole their shit. Did she? She didn't take a damn thing. Sure, I buy that. Her stealing my watch and all, I can vouch for her character. Maybe that's the least of her problems now anyway. Still, it could go right to the top if I hand it all over to the cops, only nobody needs that kind of hassle, and all I really want is my watch. Empty threat, me of all people waving cops. He sucked in his cheeks, thinking, then blew them out again like he was blowing a smoke ring. He tossed me my wallet and cigarettes. Let's take a walk to my place, he said, then turned and started out. How come, I asked. You want your watch, don't you? I've got it. My watch? Gold Rolex, right? I followed between the two buildings in silence, tripping over the same rubble. My sunglasses, like some giant squashed insect, lay broken on the sidewalk. Someone, probably me, had stepped on them in the struggle. I stopped to light a cigarette. Catching up to Jimmy, I asked, how'd you get my watch? She came by this morning, gave it to me to sell, to get my dog out of hock. Did she tell you what happened to Pike? He nodded, sour-faced. Did she tell you who did it? Yep, Ted, that fucker. But that's all he said. A very forgiving nature, I thought. Too forgiving. My silence on the subject made him nervous. His walk became a little more erratic, like he was concentrating too hard on keeping his stride normal. Only normal's a hard thing to fake and plain alien under stress. He said finally, Ted got as bad as he gave. Pike fucked him up good, believe it. Glory went over there to get her stuff. She was finally moving out, but she was afraid Ted would try to stop her. I said I'd go along, but she thought I'd make it harder. I made her bring Pike, though. Pike worships her. Ted made the monumental mistake of grabbing Gloria in front of him. Pike objected. Chomp. Exactly, he laughed. But that sounded unnatural, too. He was still holding back, concealing. The concealment more a revelation than what he was revealing. What did Ted say when you saw him, I asked. What do you mean? How do you explain what he'd done to your dog? He shrugged. No explanation. I asked, how long you known Glory? Met her in the park a couple months ago. Got to having coffee with her. She'd come by and take Pike out for walks. He loves to explore, but I can't with the leg. Steel plate on my knee. He struck it with a ringed finger, the two metals ringing even between muffled cloth and flesh. You two only friends or more than friends, I asked. There's nothing more than friends, man. What I mean is, are you the reason she left Ted? Hey, she's young enough to be my granddaughter. I only told her she had to get away from that prick. He slapped her around. She finally wised up on her own. I only offered her another option, a place to stay. She didn't take me up. I see. He should have had a bigger grudge against Ted and didn't. As we walked along, he told me he knew where Ted's place was. He even admitted going there the morning after Glory left and never returned with his dog. After Pike got cut up, she brought him straight to the vet's and was too scared to go back to Jimmy's and tell him what had happened. She was afraid of his reaction and didn't get up the courage for 2 days. So for a day and a half then, Jimmy hadn't known what had happened to either one of them. I wondered if he would have admitted all that to me if he'd killed Ted. I didn't know. His story sounded thin either way, and maybe it was wiser to steer clear of the subject altogether on the off chance he did. When we got to his garden lot, he pulled from his pocket a braided nylon key ring with 2 keys on it. One unlocked the motorcycle chain lock. He unstrung the chain and opened the gate wide till it slammed on the inside against a garden gnome, its empty face already pummeled into plaster dust. I followed him in, letting the gate swing shut, the loose chain rattling and clanging against the lead pipe. Jimmy took hold of a hoe, leaning against a gnarled crab apple tree in white blossom. Using the hoe as a staff, he walked up the path past dark earth beds with yellow blooming forsythia and blueberry bushes sprouting early green. Along the east perimeter, he had a vegetable garden of rhubarb, tomatoes, cucumbers, and stringy purple flowered chives. Several sun-bleached, marrowless dog bones were strewn in the dirt around the yard. An old grocery cart was parked by a cluster of wild white daisies. I asked him how long the garden had been there. 4 years. Cleared it out myself. There used to be 2 burnt-out Pintos here. We walked to the far end of the lot, to the door of the tool shed. A large oil drum full of rainwater stood outside it. At its base, a collection of labelless Clorox jugs. The shed door was a wide wood plank that looked just like another panel of the patchwork wall, except for a pair of hinges and a padlocked hasp. Jimmy inserted a key in the thick steel padlock and turned it, unhooked the padlock, and swung back the metal strap. Then he rehooked the padlock on its loop and pushed the door in with an audible crypt creak. He held it open, ushering me in. I hesitated. It was dark in there. But I was trying to give the impression of playing it square, so I had to dumb down my instincts. Not far to go, but they still didn't like it one bit as I bent to clear the door's lintel and entered the inky confine. I stayed a little crouched inside, afraid of a roof nail would spike my scalp if I stood up straight. Jimmy came in after and the door swung shut. I'd forgotten to close my eyes before entering, and from brightness of day I was left momentarily blind. I could hear movement around me, but couldn't see Jimmy until he blocked several pinpricks of light stealing through gaps in the boards. Slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I made out hundreds of these tiny holes, straining in the daylight as through a colander. I took a step forward. The floor was soft, like carpeting. I looked down. It was carpet. A wide remnant of burgundy medium shag, dark with soil stains, paw prints, and dirty boot marks. Another step. I kicked something dull that rolled a few inches. It was a thick knotted rope, a dog's chewy toy. And on the ground were an empty water dish and a folded Navajo blanket covered in tawny bristles. A small space, only 9 feet by 6. In one corner, a foam mattress and a bedroll. No garden tools in sight. Not a tool shed at all, but Jimmy's home. Milk crates were piled 4 high in 4 columns against the back wall, some storing dry foods, canned goods, and bottled water, others sweaters and socks, utensils, plates, and candles, and books, mostly paperbacks. I noticed well-thumbed copies of Tom Brown's Field Guide to the City and Suburban Survival, and the complete poems of Emily Dickinson, as well as several pamphlets and booklets published by Narcotics Anonymous. One crate had a bumper sticker, I heart NA, and NA hearts me. Halfway into the room, there was a clumsy-looking machine with a tank attached to it. I bent down to look at it closer. A coiled heating panel on the front and the stink of kerosene. A kerosene heater, banned in New York City. This one practically an antique, but in well-oiled working condition and full of fuel. I guessed I wouldn't be smoking in here. I jerked a thumb at it, asking, aren't these sort of dangerous? So is hypothermia, Jimmy said, looking at me over his shoulder, not turning his body away from where he crouched by an open footlocker. I assumed he was getting my watch. He'd taken his sunglasses off, and his bad eye was again visible, its milky retina pierced by a thread of daylight. I turned away. He had a completely livable space there, all the basic needs met, even some meager comforts like a radio cassette player and makeshift wash basin. And his kitchen was actually better stocked than mine would ever be. I saw 3 well-used sketch pads on top of one of the crates. One was open to a pencil drawing of a dog, clearly piped, signed by the artist, J.J. Not realistic in style. The form translated more as alien. But nonetheless, it captured the strength of the animal's muscles and his attitude of expression. I turned to compliment Jimmy on it and forgot what I was going to say. Something glinted in his right hand. Not my watch, longer and thinner. Shiny, but not gold. A wickedly curved, silver serrated edge. A tardy thought occurred to me then. If I really needed a Rolex that badly, I could buy another one. Knowing the time was overrated anyway. In that musty shack, time faltered, slowing to a sluggish drip, clogged up by fear and anticipation. My eyes held his knife as the tight focus of my universe. Too bad he couldn't keep it straight. Bright prism flashes playing off its keen edge slashed back and forth, up and down, over and across my eyes. A dry, wheezy whistle emanated from his throat as he stared at me, his mismatching eyes coldly concentrating on my face. Perversely, into my mind, the old carpenter's rule came. Measure twice, cut once.